he was able to get these corporations to take money that had been donated to them, give it to him so that this anonymous donor would match it and return double back to them. You can't get in unless you have $1 million.
Saying things like that make people really want to give you money.
Yes. You've committed this fraud, you're scared to death, and you're depressed, and going out and committing more fraud so you can buy a bigger car or more clothes or a fancy trip makes you feel good for a little bit.
We're here to talk about fraud cases and some of the fraud cases that you've worked. Is there anything specific you think would be interesting, or?
Well, in my career, and again, I was in the FBI for 26 years, and the majority of that time, I was assigned to an economic crime squad where I worked all kinds of frauds like advance fee schemes, embezzlements, business-to-business telemarketing fraud, and Ponzi schemes. So there's a lot, I have covered some of it on my podcast, just breaking it down, luckily with some of the actual subjects of my cases. I've gotten them to come on to talk about the investigation. So it's up to you. Now, I did, like you, have one of my cases on American greed, and whether you're a subject or you are an investigator, as a person that talks about fraud, that is like, the high level to have one of your cases on American greed. So we can talk about that one.
Okay. Which one was that?
Now, that was a Ponzi scheme. That was a $350 million Ponzi scheme that occurred in Philadelphia, because that's where 24 of my 26 years in the FBI spent, in Philadelphia. And his name was John Bennett. And John Bennett was a fundraiser. He actually worked for charities, a lot of them Christian-based charities, in order to bring more funding to those organizations. He taught their leaders, how to fundraise. He had his own business doing this, and it was legitimate business. But at one point, he was having some financial difficulties. And I think that's what's really interesting that a lot of people don't understand. Most Ponzi schemes are not I guess you would call it a predatory type of fraud. They're situational. Something happened in a legitimate business that caused the person, the business owner, to do unethical behaviors that turned into criminal fraud behaviors.
Right. I've actually said that many times, because people will say, oh, that person, he's a con man, he's running a scam. It's like, wait a minute, 99% of these started off as just a legitimate, investment scheme, and not scheme scheme in a good way. Not scheme. People hear scheme, they think bad.
Right.
It's a financial scheme that maybe it was working for years. I knew a guy that his was working for 4 or 5 years, and then he had a bad quarter, and then another bad quarter, and then he just started blatantly lying, because he thought, if I start telling people that we had a bad quarter and that we lost money, they'll pull their funds.
Right.
And the whole thing will fail. And I don't want that. So I'm just going to fudge a couple of quarterly reports, and I'm going to make it back. And then, of course, it doesn't.
Right.
They make worse and worse, more and more risky decisions that go bad. And before you know it, it's just a complete Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, exactly. It's a situational motivation that caused them to go in that direction. Right. That doesn't make it right or give them an excuse, but that is how they got into the trouble. Instead of throwing up their hands and says, okay, this business is failing, let's just move on, they try to make it work by, as you said, doing things to get in more money, to get in more investors. And the things that they do is lie. Lie and deceive. And that's the definition of fraud. When you get something of value, whether it's money or some, a house or whatever, based on deceptions and lies. And that's when it becomes a fraud. When you know that what you're saying is not true, that, you are making up stuff or leaving out things in order to convince people to give you money. That's a
Right.
fraud.
Right. And what was the person, you said it was a $300 million fraud?
Yeah, $300 million Ponzi scheme. So I can tell you from the very beginning how it happened. He was having some financial trouble.
What was his name
And
again? I'm sorry.
John Bennett.
Bennett.
And
Okay.
the name of his company was the New Era, the Foundation of New Era Philanthropy.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, it was real at the beginning. He
Right.
was helping people, helping organizations obtain money and funding. And I mean, that's good work. I mean,
Right.
that's good work. But he got into some financial trouble, and he realized that the way he could get some money in was that he went to some of the donors that he worked with, some of the philanthropists, and he told them that he had an opportunity, that he had someone that was willing to match their donations. So if they wanted to send in, matching funds are legitimate. Your corporations and
I'm not saying
companies.
that.
Hmm?
How often does that happen? But I hear you.
Right, but companies and corporations match their workers' donations all the time.
Like,
But
okay.
this is a anonymous philanthropist who is willing to match the donations of like-minded rich people, who he wants to also help. And so he convinced 4 or 5 people. Just, it was a really short little scam that he was putting together because he was desperate and he needed money. He actually had overdraft a bank account, and he was trying to return that money to the bank. And so he's able to convince a few people, 4 or 5 people, to give him, I think it was like 2,000 or 2,500 each. And so once he got that money and was able to get his bank account straight, he told the people that the anonymous donors were going to match the funds, and he was going to give it to their favorite charity. Well, they enjoyed it so much that they told more people.
Right.
And more people came to him, and they wanted to have their donations matched. And I can't give him any excuses, but he kept doing it. He loved, his ego just loved the fact that these rich people, these donors were coming to him saying, I want to be involved in this. I want to have your anonymous philanthropist match my funds too. And he kept doing it, and he kept doing it. And we all know what
Right. Well, did they ever say, hey, wait, like you're saying they're going to donate to their favorite charity, then they should have been able to see their donations being matched.
But there was one little thing about it. In order to make sure that the corporation, the company, the nonprofit that you were donating to was going to use this for special events and special funding, he was going to hold on to it for 6 months. So you give him your donation.
Okay.
Once the philanthropist, the anonymous donor, sees that, the money is there for 6 months, then he matches it. Then the nonprofit gets your funding. And of course, later, 6 months wasn't long enough because he needed to generate more money. And so he held on to your money for a year, and it wasn't $2,000 or $2,500. It was $50,000 or $1 million. And he branched out not just from anonymous, from donors and, rich philanthropists, but now he went to institutions. And I've got to look this up because I don't want to name a name that is wrong. Like the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, United Way, Juvenile Diabetes, the Franklin Institute, the Free Library of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Orchestra. He was able to get these corporations to take money that had been donated to them, give it to him for 6 months to a year, so that this anonymous donor would match it and return double back to them. And so he just had the gift of being able to talk to these individuals who were known because of their ability to raise funds for these major Philadelphia organizations.
Well, I was going to say also, I'm sure what helped him is that he had legitimately been been, you know, in this field for whatever it was, 5 or 10 years or however long he'd been functioning. So it's not like, hey, this guy popped up, nobody's heard of him. No, he's been doing this for 10 years. So he seems very legit. There was one of the Ponzi scheme guys that I met. He had run a legitimate business for 15 years, investing in silver. And so when he became a Ponzi scheme, and he ran his Ponzi scheme for 10 years, he'd been around for 15 years. So everybody was like, by that point, he was on the city council. Everybody knew him in town. People had invested. He'd never lost their money. So everybody's singing his praises. So when he went straight Ponzi scheme, there was no doubt. His credibility wasn't in question.
No. And nobody bothered to do their own personal due diligence,
right?
Because this institution, made a bunch of money off of this, and this one did. I need to get involved. I mean, it was almost like Madoff, where people were organizations were begging him to be a part of this foundation of philanthropy. They wanted to participate, and he turned some people away at the beginning. At the end,
right.
He was taking anybody he could. But nobody bothered to do their own checking, their own research. They just depended on the social proof that it was working. So-and-so got a big fat check.
Right.
And so, that's exactly what happened in this particular case. But as we know, there is no Ponzi scheme that can last forever, because there is not enough money in the world that is going to keep a big Ponzi scheme afloat, because the only way that you can keep it going is to get more and more investors so that you can pay the old investors back with the money that you get from the new investors. And so that's why the turns became longer, that he was going to keep the money, and the amount of money that you needed to get into the program became larger, because he was trying to get as much as he could to keep this Ponzi scheme afloat.
Your $2,000 isn't going to help me stay afloat. It's $50,000 minimum.
Yes. No, you can't get in unless you have $1 million.
Right. And what's funny is that type of saying things like that and those types of restrictions make people really want to give you money.
Yes.
It's exclusive.
It's exclusive. Oh, yes. I want to be a part of that, Yeah, that's how it worked. And the only reason that it fell apart at the time that it did, I mean, it eventually would have anyway, was that he had actually taken out a loan from Prudential in order because it was getting tight and he needed to pay some of these people back. And so he had taken out a loan, and at some point when that loan wasn't being paid, Prudential called it, the margin call. We want our money back. You got to pay us. And at that point, the lawyers and attorneys came in and told him, you're going to have to file for bankruptcy. So that's how and the FBI found out about this, because it was on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer that this famous charity foundation had filed for bankruptcy.
So how did it end up? Is it just that the reporters were watching the bankruptcy filings, or did someone contact them and say, hey, I gave this guy $200,000. He's held it for 18 months and he told me this, and now he's in bankruptcy. I think there's a scam.
Yeah, I think it was a combination, because again, these were huge institutions in Philadelphia, and embarrassing enough to the newspaper, they had maybe like a month before had a whole article about how great he was, and all the good work that he had done.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
And so once the bankruptcy was filed, they did the right thing. They went right back in to say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, we made a mistake.
Yeah, we made a mistake. And they really started doing some digging on their own. And so once we saw that article on the front page of the Inquirer, uh, I went into my supervisor, because I'm a ambitious agent, and I
Right.
said I'd love to work this. I love to see if there's anything criminal here. The implications were that it was. And then I went over to the U.S. Attorney's office and met with the attorneys over there, and we put together a team. It was one of those cases where you needed a team. So there was actually myself and two other agents working on this, and two attorneys, federal prosecutors working on this case, and with financial assistance and things like that, all working on this case to try to figure out what the hell happened.
So how does that start? Do you first go out and order subpoenas, or do you first go out and try and locate some the victims? Do you try and
Right.
get like like word of mouth first and try and and then kind of like island hop your way through the process, or do you already know we can subpoena these? Well, I guess you have the bankruptcy filing, which is
Yes,
perfect. You've already
exactly.
got a blueprint.
Yes, we already have, and the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, were working on it also because this was supposed to be an investment. We all now know that it wasn't an investment. It wasn't something they thought it was something that they should have been monitoring and had been registered in the first place, but it was really a scam. So it went from a possible civil case with the SEC to a criminal case, with the FBI and the Justice Department. And so, yeah, we were lucky because they had filed for bankruptcy, so all of the business had been closed and taken over by the bankruptcy court. All the records were there. We still had to do, just for legal purposes, we still had to file subpoenas and search records, but they were all there. All we had to do is just walk into the office and pull up the file cabinets and look in the files. And we actually worked that case in his office, took over the office because the files were already there. They were
Right.
already organized, and so we for several months we took over his office as we went through
And he
those
knows that
files.
he has to know this.
Oh yeah, he knows it. Yeah, he knows it from the very beginning. And a lot of fraud cases, especially when you're talking about a Ponzi scheme, people know that they're being investigated because we learn about it when, again, the Ponzi scheme starts to fail. So now victims and investors are screaming and yelling, and they know that the gig is up, as they would say.
Did Bennett ever come to you before that and say, look, I want to talk? Or did he just wait and hope that you guys said, oh, there's nothing illegal here?
He did not initially come and talk, but I'm sure you've heard of the word proffer.
Right.
Yes, and so he did proffer towards the end. And for your audience, a proffer is when a subject comes in and lays everything out for the prosecutors and the investigators, with the understanding that nothing that they say will be used against them if they tell the truth.
Right.
It just allows the investigators to skip a few, hurdles and just get to the information right away.
Right.
So he came in and he did proffer. The strange thing about this case, which I think makes it even more unique, first you have the fact that it's a charity. It's a charity Ponzi scheme that makes it different. But the other part of it is that here's this person that's supposed to be a good man, and I guess he could not bring himself to admit that he had committed a fraud. And so he pled no contest, which is basically saying, hey, I understand that the FBI has gathered all the evidence to prove, they think they've gathered enough evidence to prove that I am guilty. I am not going to admit to my guilt, but I will plead no
It's a bad
contest.
idea.
Yeah.
Like, do you get acceptance of responsibility still?
I don't believe he did. I mean, you're right. How can you
Right.
when you're saying I'm going to go ahead and not take you to trial, but I don't really believe that I did what you.
I don't. I mean, how can
Yeah.
so? So here's what that kind of reminds me of is I've talked to U.S. attorneys, and I've spoken with lawyers and many doctors, and a lot of times what they'll say is you'll get these doctors from these pill mills in, and at least with a drug dealer, he comes in, sits down, he knows he was breaking the law. He was selling coke. He's been doing it a long time, or heroin, whatever it was. And he knows I'm a criminal. I was breaking the law. He said, but you would get these doctors in and sit down, and it would be 30 minutes to an hour just trying to convince them that they'd broken the law.
Wow.
Because they're like, I came in, the guy called, he had whatever, his knee hurt. He said this, the MRI said this. I filed, I gave him this much prescription. That's the most I can give him. He was in a lot of pain. How was I supposed to know he was doctor shopping or he was a drug addict? We gave him the pills. He was taking them. Like it would be like an hour where they're like, what are you doing? Like, you were breaking the law. You were everybody that walked in and had a nose sniffle, you were giving them the max prescription you could give them. So it's funny that he would walk in, because it seems like, to me, it's obvious. He knows he was lying. He knows there was no anonymous donor. He knows he lied to get the contributions. Why would you think you weren't committing a fraud?
Oh, wait a minute. He didn't know there were no anonymous donors. He was delusional.
That's what he tried to say?
That is his rationalization. He was delusional, and he thought he was meeting with anonymous donors. He thought that they were matching. That is the preposterous excuse that he brought, and he stuck with it all along the way.
Did they call you on the phone? Did they call him on the phone? Were there text messages,
emails?
Yes,
he was meeting with them. And that was...
What's their phone number? Let's call them.
Well, first of all, I said we didn't go to trial, but we actually had a sentencing hearing that lasted a week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay.
A long
sentencing hearing that lasted a week. I was able to testify in that and show what, I found. We also had an agent who was a CPA on the team, Brian Cosgriff, and, he did a lot of the financial, flow charts and everything to show how the money went. And one of the biggest things was, he did pay taxes, but the interest payments alone should have been huge if you had all of these millions of dollars sitting in an account, supposedly escrow account for, a year. But he had very little money because the money never stayed there long enough, And so we were able to show all of this. My responsibility was to talk to the victims. And what you just said about trying to convince a doctor or somebody that they, had committed a fraud, my job was as difficult trying to convince some of the victims that they were victims. The one thing about fraud cases that is totally different than any other type of criminal case is, like, if there's a bank robbery or a drug investigation, you already know the crime has occurred. Now you're just trying to prove who did it.
Right.
But in a fraud investigation, you first had to prove that a crime occurred, that this fraud was not a civil matter, that it wasn't a business disagreement, that it wasn't a contract negotiation that went wrong.
Right.
You had to first prove that it was a fraud, that it was criminal, before you can then, go on with your investigation of who committed that fraud. They're very complex cases. I loved working them, and if I was able to go through a file cabinet and find an incriminating document, I was thrilled. This is so exciting. Woohoo! When there's other agents who would rather stick a needle in their eye than to have to go through, a box of documents. I loved it.
I was going to say, do you think that the victims might have been, first of all, that's a different kind of victim that you're looking at, because these are people that were giving charitable contributions. They weren't really expecting anything in return, right? or were
Well,
they?
and
Like, how did that work?
I know that there's I hate to victim blame, but in some situations your victims aren't as innocent. And actually, I wrote one of my crime novels. I fictionalized this story, and I titled it "Greedy Givers,"
Right.
because these people that were donating, these philanthropists, there was a bit of ego involved in it, because they weren't just anonymously giving money to their charities. The reason that they invested so heavily is because they wanted people to see
They wanted
how
their
much
names attached.
money. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
maybe even get their name on a building. So there is a little bit of greed and ego involved in the victims of this type of Ponzi scheme, this charity Ponzi scheme. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, they definitely there was definitely a benefit to them. I was thinking, hey, I'm giving $100,000, and they never expected anything in return. So did they feel victimized? No, because the money was gone. I was
Oh,
giving
they
it
felt
anyway.
victimized.
Okay,
They felt, there were some that had to be convinced that John Bennett had committed a crime because he was such a good man and they believed in him. But once they realized that their charities, if they had still had money in the business in the Ponzi scheme, once they realized that charity was not going to get that money, yes, they felt victimized, especially those who came in at the beginning, because, and I know you know this term, of clawback.
right.
Right. So some of their nonprofits and their institutions that they had donated to made out big and maybe had gotten 2 million, 3 million out of this scheme. Well, the court
Of
says,
course, says give it
hey,
back.
yeah, court says give it back. This was a fraud. The money that you got from John Bennett from the foundation was fraudulently gained. And so you cannot benefit from this fraud. And so whatever money you got to give it back. Do you know how difficult that is to do if that money is now tied into a new building, a
Right.
new curriculum, salaries of people that you've hired, the expansion that you've done to your organization?
Well,
Um, yeah.
I recall that this one Ponzi guy. He was talking about how one of his investors who'd invested like $1 million, and but had gotten like 3 or 4 million out of the Ponzi. And when they went to him to claw back, he hired an attorney. He fought, and they came up with an agreement. Like, he didn't pay back the 4 million. He ended up negotiating less than half that to repay. And then there were other people that they put in 100,000, they got out 400,000. They sold their primary residence. Like, they didn't even put up a fight. They were ready to, I'll sell this, I'll sell this, I'll sell this. Like, so they were really double victimized.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and I remember we were talking. He was like, it's funny because the one guy who could have paid the money back, he easily could have given him 4 million, because this guy's worth probably $30 million. He said he could have given. He fought and paid back less than 2 million. He said, but people that legitimately, this was like their retirement fund. They had paid off they had a $500,000 house. They had paid off. They had, they suddenly started selling stocks. They took out loans on their homes. Everything to try and pay back the $300,000 or $400,000. And he's like, and they didn't have it,
Sure.
but they didn't put up a fight either.
Right. Yeah, and that's a lot of people don't realize that in Bernie Madoff scam, almost all of the victims got their initial investment back because of clawback. I think they got at least 85 to 90 cents on every dollar back. Now, they thought, of course, they had invested and had a boatload of money in the bank.
Right.
They didn't get that back, but they got their initial investment back. And so as far as the court was concerned, they were made whole because they didn't deserve the money that they thought that they had gained, through the investment, because it was a scam. It was a fraud.
Right. I was thinking maybe some of the people didn't think they had been victimized because maybe they were embarrassed.
Oh, absolutely.
I know that there was have you ever heard of the Angola scam?
Angola scam.
It's
Probably,
it's
yeah.
You probably heard of it, like when I explain it. So there were like, I'm going to say 3 or 4 inmates in Angola State Prison. And this is prior to the internet. This is pre-internet. They had put an ad in a newspaper, a newspaper that was called like Out and About or something, which was a gay news, not a gay, it was like a gay publication. And it was saying that they were a gay male that was locked up in, like a 90-day drug rehab center. And he was a 22-year-old, handsome gay male looking for a pen pal, seeking an older, distinguished male. So they were running all this through a lawyer. So they start running. And it's funny because John Grisham wrote a book called The Brethren that talks about the scam, but I actually had seen a documentary before I even read the book. And they copy the Angola scam in John Grisham's book. So, which is a great book, by the way, one of my favorites.
I don't think I've read I read a lot of his books. I just read the new one that came out that's supposed to be the sequel to The Firm.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
It's called, I can't believe I just can't remember it, but I just read it last week and it's a little disappointing, but never mind.
Well, so anyway, these guys are so they start getting letters from older men. You have to remember, this is back in the 80s, early 80s. So they're getting letters from men that are established men that are married with children. So if you were a 50-year-old man that had some means, but you had no wife or children, they threw the letter out. They didn't respond. If you weren't, though, they had a photograph of an inmate that was like 22 with his shirt off, and they would send the photograph, and then they would start writing letters from this married man in the 80s when it was, and he's married, has children, and they would spark up a correspondence. And before you know it, this guy's talking about how he despises his wife, how his children are this, unappreciative, all these horrible things. They start talking dirty in the letters. This guy can't talk on the phone, not for 60 days or something. They had a whole plan. And they would get these guys locked in, and then they would eventually get contacted by someone on the street who would say, look, here's copies of your letters. We're going to send all these letters to your family, or you can send X amount of dollars to this offshore account. And they got like $500,000 in the 80s from prison. And when the FBI investigated it finally, because there ended up being a murder and a whole bunch of other things not related to them, but one of the guys got out and actually ends up killing somebody. And when they're talking to him, he says, listen, I'm going to tell you about a scam. He's trying to get out of it, get less time or something.
A downward departure.
Right. Well, when the FBI comes in and they start contacting all the victims, they were like 90% of the victims refused to cooperate. They were like, no, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to talk about it, because they were in a vulnerable position and they didn't want anything to do with it. They said literally they could only get out of, let's say, 40 or 50 men that had given money. They got maybe 4. And they said those men were terrified. So I always think about that. It's embarrassing to be taken. People immediately think you're stupid if you gave money. And the truth is that I've always noticed that when I've talked to, fraudsters, is that it's really not stupid people that give to these, because especially if the scam makes sense. If the scheme makes sense, like you're right. If you give me this much money and you do this with this and this happens and this happens, I will get this much back. And that makes sense. The problem
is, he proved it. I mean, he had people that had gotten that matching money from the anonymous donor. So once, those people got their money and they went out there, again, social proof saying that, yeah, he said this and it worked. It happened. Right.
Yeah, it's the credibility of Bernie Madoff. Like, it doesn't matter. You've got people screaming and hollering. And it's like, yeah, but John gave him money. He's been getting money back. Sally gave him money. They get money. He's been investing for 20 years. Like,
why wouldn't I want a piece of that?
Right.
Who wouldn't?
But so it's not stupid people that get caught by these scams. These are intelligent people. They're just they get.
But I think that the statistic is that like only 5% of the people who get caught in a fraud or a scam report it. Very few people report it. They say to themselves, well, there goes one. I was stupid, and they just keep moving on.
Right.
They don't report it because they're ashamed that they were defrauded. But we all know how charming, con artists are.
So what happened with Bennett? What did he end up getting?
Well, he ended up getting 12 years, and that's pretty good for a fraudster, especially who had all of these famous people and sending in letters at the sentencing hearing on his behalf, because he had years of doing good work. So I think we wanted 28 years, and the judge gave him 12. So I don't know. He's out by now, but I don't know what happened to him, what he's doing now. He was not totally innocent, because a lot of people were trying to say he was trying to do good work. Yeah, but he took about 4 million, 5 million of that money and spent it on himself. He bought himself a house. He bought his daughter a house. He bought a Lexus. He bought her one. So he was traveling all over the world. Taking these trips. In order to prove his philanthropy. So he was spending other people's money.
Yeah. I was going to say Elizabeth Holmes, ultimately was trying to do good work. That doesn't mean, she shouldn't have to go. She got what, 13 years? I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Shocked she only got 13 years. Like, it's not like it was an accounting error.
Yeah.
You're blatantly lying to people.
Yeah. Deliberate fraud.
Right. And it's not like over the course of it wasn't over the course of a month.
Yeah.
This is years.
Years. But I mean, when it comes to white collar crime, anything over 10 years is pretty significant.
Right.
Pretty significant.
Yeah. I got 26 years.
Yeah, I saw that. But I don't remember. I actually listened on my way back from Florida when we met. I listened to your whole story. It was like 6 hours worth of your videos. I just kept playing one after another on the plane, waiting in the airport. So, so it was a fascinating story.
What's funny about that is that people will ask, they're like, do you think 26 years was, too much? Like, I do think 26 years.
You did 13 or 18?
I did 13.
Okay.
But, they're like, well, what do you think you should have gotten? I was like, I don't know. Like, I go back and forth. Sometimes I think 10, I should have probably got 10. But then I think, like, I don't know even if that was enough, because it's not, it's really the fact that I had already been given a slap on the wrist.
Yes.
So, does that make sense? And that's the part.
I remember, you had gone once before. Yeah.
Well, I didn't go to prison the first time. I just got 3 years probation.
Oh, okay.
So, but to me,
throw the book at him the second time.
Yeah, I kind of, and then that's the other thing. I committed another scam, and then I didn't take responsibility. I took off on the run, and then I continued to commit scams. So it's like, okay, now listen, bro. Like, even I have to go, ooh, was 10 years enough? Like,
all right. So I was a psychology major in college. So can we go into that a little bit? Because I know that when it comes to fraud, they talk about 3 things. They talk about opportunity. Right. They talk about
necessity. Yeah.
Now, was it opportunity? Outside pressure. So this is why people commit frauds. They have an opportunity. They have an outside pressure, whether it is they're divorced or they're an addict or they're having financial problems. And then they have a rationalization.
So I was going to say justification.
Yeah. Okay.
Again, they justify it to themselves.
All right. So in your case with the bank frauds and the mortgage frauds, can you break down that opportunity, pressure, and rationalization?
Well, I feel like my opportunity was that I knew the system, and I knew there were multiple, let's say fractures that, that I could take advantage of. Like I knew there was definitely, the system was definitely flawed for someone who worked on the inside and understood it. Even when I got in trouble and was removed from being, the owner of the business, I still had access to to that inside track, or that, those people were still willing to help me and work with me. So the opportunity was there just because I had the knowledge to take advantage of it. And then I would say that, the outside pressure was that, first it was that I needed the money. I said initially I needed the money, and I was broke and I was desperate, and I didn't want to go backwards. I didn't want to be embarrassed. And, does it make sense? Like, there were all these external pressures to
Was
make
it
money
more
and succeed.
a status that you had money and now you didn't have as much and you wanted to maintain that status? So was the
Yes.
pressure maintaining a status?
And I also really didn't want to disappoint my father. Does it make sense? Like, my father, for the first time in my life, was proud of me. So that for some reason meant the world to me. And then I would say I justified it because I thought, like, I'm smart. There are these flaws. I can take advantage of them, and I'm gonna take this. I'm gonna take money from banks. Like, nobody's gonna get hurt. And that was the yeah. Well, first it was easy. It was like, I'm getting someone into a house. Like, you deserve to be in that house. And yes, you made 50,000 last year. And if you'd made 55, you could qualify. I'm changing a 0 to a 5. It's not a big deal. The person has always paid their rent. It's going to be fine. And then it becomes, oh, this person, she was only 30 days late. She caught it up before. And if she had never been 30 days late, she would get the loan. And that's not right. And I'm sure she's going to be fine. I'm going to get her into that. So you justify. But then it became, that got larger and larger. Then when I ran just a straight scam, it was like, the bank's going to lose $100,000. What does it matter? It's Bank of America. It's not like they're going to miss it. They've already, I used to say this all the time, when the actuaries calculate their interest rate and fees and payments, they've already accounted for fraud. So the money's already available. Somebody has to benefit. I mean, what a reach. Like, it wouldn't be right to leave it there. Yeah. So I did that.
So somebody has to commit the fraud in order to make it balance out.
It was almost like
go ahead and do it.
Like almost like Bank of America had an account waiting for me. They're like, look, if you can access it, the money's there. So, and then of course, when I eventually, when the FBI is coming and I go on the run, my justification was like, look at me. I'm adorable. I can't go to prison. Oh, no. I can't. It's not going to be good. I saw Shawshank, and the guy that played, Andrew Dufresne was like 62. Like, I'm not going to stand. I can't. I didn't know what camps were. I didn't know what a camp was, what a low was. I didn't realize they'll put me in a place where it's basically just like a rough high school. You're going to be okay, And so, it just couldn't. It was just such arrogance on my part. And I actually said this the other day. Is like, every bad decision I've ever made was based on my ego and just arrogance.
Right.
It really boils down to that. So, which is something, obviously, that doesn't go away.
Right.
I constantly.
So how do you channel that now? Because you still are you.
Yeah.
You're, I hope you're not still committing different frauds. So how are you channeling that ego, that status pressure, Well,
I think even if I joke about stuff like that, I get this look from my wife. That's one thing. It's the don't. Well, I'm not visiting you in prison. Like, that's not happening.
I love your Patreon commercial or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Oh, I love it. I laughed and laughed and giggled and giggled and giggled. But that's the question. I always, in these situations, in these frauds, I have always said it's about greed. But as I've gotten older and I've talked to more people who are in the fraud investigating business, I realize a lot of times it's something more than greed. It is and this doesn't necessarily apply to you, but it is loneliness. It is imposter syndrome. It is, feeling not worthy and wanting to feel good about themselves. It's depression. It's a lot of things that give fraudsters the rationalization of I deserve this or I need this to make myself feel better, especially when it comes to people that embezzle money.
I was
That's
going to say
still
that the moment I disagree, I'm going to interrupt.
okay.
Um,
Oh, so
because
you're on board?
oh, absolutely. Every single thing you've said is because initially I said, well, I needed the money. Okay, well, wait a minute. You were behind on your bills. The first time I committed fraud, I was probably a month behind on my mortgage payment, and I was a couple months behind on my car payment, and literally like Ford's saying, look, we're going to have somebody come get your car.
Sure.
So I needed this loan to close. So first I said, hey, I need the money. Okay. And then you do, and you close a couple loans, and you get, and all I was getting was a broker fee that I wouldn't have normally gotten.
Right.
Okay, well, now you've got the money, and then you're continuing to do it, and then eventually you get 50 or 100,000 in the bank. Okay, well, now you've got 100,000. You can stop now. You've got a cushion. Nobody knows nobody knows these loans have any fraud in them. You're good. Why am I still doing it? And then you're doing it. Why? Because everybody sees you're driving a brand new car and you're doing great and you're buying. I got dinner. No, I got it. And you're going on vacation and you're wearing nice clothes and then you get a nicer house and then you don't want to back up. You don't want to go backwards. It's imposter. Hey, I'm an imposter because I am now living the life of a successful person that I'm not really that person.
Right. Another thing that an agent that I was talking to about this brought up is that when you commit a fraud, you're fearful. And a lot of times you continue because continuing makes you even temporarily feel better. So you've committed this fraud, you're going to get caught, and you're scared to death and you're depressed, and going out and committing more fraud so you can buy a bigger car or more clothes or a fancy trip makes you feel good for a little bit.
You know what I was going to say? So, and this isn't even the money, because when things like this would happen, I had $200,000-$300,000 already. So I don't even need to do it. I'm just gathering money at this point. I've said this before. I'm sure people will have heard me say this, that I used to, joke around, and it's that there is no better feeling in the world than to walk into Bank of America, hand them a fake ID, fake income docs, fake bank statements, have them, pull your credit on your fake identity, and have them hand you a check for $250,000 and thank you for ripping them off. I mean, you genuinely walk out of there like you feel like James Bond.
Yeah, I did this. I got away with this. I'm the greatest person in the world, right? Because
and that money didn't change anything, by the way. You just deposit it and you keep on going because all my bills are paid. I have money. I'm going on vacations. I have couple nice vehicles. I've got an amazing condo. That $250,000 didn't change anything. It was the feeling that I think if I do this and this and this, I bet I could borrow $250 on that house. Okay, I'm going to go satisfy this mortgage. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get that. And then it's the planning and then seeing it happen. And then, you're giving people money that don't, somebody asked me for 10 grand. Of course, I'm a big shot. They asked for 25 to help them with it. Of course.
No problem.
What does it matter?
Yeah. I'm a good person.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Look at what a good person I am.
Look how generous and kind I am to others. Yeah. I'm a good person. That's part of the rationalization. Isn't that fascinating? Because again, I used to, when I was doing the work, I just chalked it up to just pure, what's the word?
Pure greed. Yeah, pure greed. So I was going to say,
and now I realize there's so much more to it. And, I think about the people And I don't know if you're going to agree with this, so I know you'll stop me if you don't. But being a fraudster, doing cons, is very similar to people that are cheating on their test at high school, or cheating in their marriage, or cheating, just being cheaters all along. It's that same personality that rationalizes that bad behavior that may be unethical and takes it to the next degree where it becomes criminal. But it's a flaw that allows good people in some situations to do bad things when others, have that check where they say, oh, I've reached that line and I'm not crossing that line.
Right. And I, I've always said, like, under the right circumstances, anybody will commit a crime. My bar is just much lower, and I think that, but what's funny is, my initial crimes, think about it. It was like first changing a W-2. I'm thinking that doesn't hurt. It's not hurting anybody. She gets a loan. She should probably could have gone to another lender and got it, whatever. And this borrower gets it, and this one and this one. And then that becomes, okay, well, I'm going to run a scam, and the banks don't even know they're being scammed, and they're losing money anyway that's already accounted for. And okay, fine. But then when I kind of went on the run, now I'm finding homeowners, and I'm renting your house, assuming your identity, borrowing 3 or 4 mortgages in your name.
Identity fraud, right?
Right. And then I'm taking the money out and I'm leaving. Then you don't have a clue. Like, the only mistake you made in life was you crossed my path. That was the only thing. You're living your life. You're a CPA. You're a doctor. And what I always told myself was, oh, it's not a big deal. They'll make a few phone calls and it'll be taken care of. They'll fix it. They'll get paid back by the title insurance company. Not a big deal. He's a lawyer, or he's a doctor. He's got plenty of money. He's not going to be hurt. He doesn't have to repay this because he doesn't. The title company will pay it, or the bank will be out the money. It's not going to cost him but a few phone calls. And the truth is, some of these guys went out. They had to make mortgage payments because the house isn't rented anymore, or the house,
right.
I'm not making the owner finance payment, and they still have a mortgage. Even though I satisfied it, they still owe it. The new mortgages they don't owe, but they have to go hire an attorney. Why does he have to hire an attorney? Because he is a doctor and he works 70 hours a week.
Right.
He's not an attorney.
Yeah, he didn't have time to try to clean that mess up.
Right. He doesn't have
right.
time to figure out how to even fill out the form. So he gives $10,000 to an attorney. He makes a bunch of mortgage payments. They have to then file a suit for quiet title. Those banks and mortgage companies and lenders have to agree to satisfy those loans. All of these things have to happen. So this lawyer lawyer loses $6,000 or $7,000. This guy loses $5,000. This guy loses $15,000. So, is $15,000 to a doctor a lot of money? I don't know, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire. If I don't have to pay $15,000, I don't want to lose. Nobody wants to lose $15,000.
No.
And I'll bet you what was worse than the $15,000 is the stress of what's going to happen, and think about it, and feeling violated, right? Like, someone breaks into your house and steals your TV. Yeah, okay, the TV sucks, but the idea that someone broke into my house and now I don't feel safe, like,
right,
that's a shitty thing to do. But as a fraudster, like, I never allowed myself, I very quickly shrugged it off to, oh, he's rich, he'll be fine. It's not a big deal.
What did you think, or what did you say to yourself that made it okay when you went into a community and purchased all of these properties at inflated prices and then left, and now you have people who are underwater, with their mortgages, because soon the community, the property values are corrected? Or if they don't ever get corrected, you now have priced people out of a community that they normally would have been able to afford, and now they can't. So there's really a lot. When I was listening to you, talk about that part of your mortgage scam, I thought, yeah, this really has ripples all through the community.
Yeah, but once again, it's you shrug it off, and it's like, oh, you can't. There's nobody specific you can point to that said I couldn't buy a house in that neighborhood. In a way, I could say, hey, I definitely, maybe I helped it because now these people have the ability to borrow, HELOCs on loans because there's equity that didn't really exist, or maybe they're now able to qualify for a loan on
That's
a
very
house.
nice of you.
Right, right. I'm doing you a favor, and so
Right.
you can, like, to me, I could justify it. The pendulum can swing the other way in my justification. And it's not that I thought about that a lot anyway, because there are no specific victims. You could say overall you victimize an entire community. Yeah, but can you pick one person that I victimize? It's like, well, no, I can't pick one. Exactly. So we're good. So for me, I justify it and I move on. And as a fraudster, as a con man, you have to be able to justify that, to sleep at night, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's easy for me to justify that. Just like you'll see some FBI agents or prosecutors, they end up making you sound like a monster that you as a fraudster feel like, I'm not a
That's not
monster. Like, I
me.
didn't specifically
No.
do these things. Like, it never entered my mind that this was going to be the result of that. I thought they'd make some phone calls and it would get fixed. And you do in your mind. It's not till later when you're sitting in a prison cell and maybe, like for me, I'm writing a memoir and I'm really thinking about it. I'm like, man, that doctor didn't do anything to deserve this.
Sure.
This guy did all the right things and made the one mistake of crossing my path, and now he had to fork over $10,000 or $15,000 and the headaches and the phone calls and the stress. And I was like, man, that was a jerk. That was a real, excuse my language. That was a dick move. It's
Yeah.
like, but at the time, I didn't think about that. You don't allow yourself to think about that.
No, I guess if you allowed yourself to think about it, then you wouldn't be able to do it. And that would cause you even more mental pain because you feel that you need whatever it is, the gratification you get or the money that you get from committing the fraud. And
Right.
as an investigator, I get to see both sides of it because, I'm having the opportunity to interview the
Mhm.
victims and also the subject. And I will say this, I never met a fraudster or conman that I didn't like.
No,
They're really
horrible.
good. Yeah. They're all adorable, just
Yeah.
like you,
I I would meet these guys in prison and you
Yeah,
talk to them and
yeah, yeah.
there was this guy, Andrew Levinson, and I could just listen to him forever. I was just like, well, then what happened?
Yeah.
Tell me a story.
Uh-huh. They're just so good at it. That personality, they have to develop a personality, a pleasing personality, in order to convince people to trust them. I mean, and it's nice. I probably have missed out on so many great opportunities because I'm so skeptical. It's like, yeah, okay, right. No, no, thank you. I'm not investing. No, thank you. I'm not interested because I don't even want to hear it, because I've seen, how things can go wrong. And so I just dismiss things and don't take part. But I can see how, someone can be convinced. And of course, that's where you get the word con from. It's being able to, convince confidence and convincing somebody to do something that normally, if they had thought about it for just a little bit longer, they wouldn't have taken that action.
Right. Can I ask you a question? Have you followed the Sam Bankman-Fried?
Yeah, I've been reading it. I know we're all waiting for the sentencing now.
Right.
That will be really interesting to see.
What do you think his sentence will be?
You know what? It's one of those things you really don't know. And his was another example, I think, what that we talked about, where his fraud was more situational. It wasn't predatory. He didn't go out to scam people, but once he got into the situation where things weren't going right, and I don't know if it's true that he was over his head and, I just don't know anything about finances, but it didn't start out that way. But
Right.
once it did, he did nothing to stop it. And again, getting all of this press, getting, all this associations with all these other big name billionaires, I had to go to his head, and he didn't want to lose that status. But as far as what I think he's going to get, I don't know. We'll go with Elizabeth Banks,
Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes, and say 13, 15 years.
He stole. It's a lot more money.
I know.
I think. Yeah, and I think he has some more enhancements. I think there was kind of changing changing jurisdictions to evade capture. Like he's opening these things in different countries. These exchanges. I think. I definitely. Well, Elizabeth Holmes got sophisticated means. I think. Me and another guy I was talking to, another fraudster. He was saying the same thing you're saying. He's like 10 years, and I'm like. He's roughly 10 years. And I said 20. He goes, no way. And he starts talking about the guidelines and this and that. And I'm like, I'm telling you, it's way more money. They're going to put a bunch of victims on the, like most of the people that invested in Theranos for Elizabeth Holmes, like, I don't like, those were like institutions. Like, I don't, I think crypto people put money into FTX. And I think that, there are people that they're going to be able to say, hey, I put $60,000 and that was my life savings and I'm 60 years old. But it's
very seldom that you see white collar crime people get a lot of time. And sadly, I think that the judges who make those final decisions, I mean, you do have your guidelines and things like that. But I think at the end, they see this person differently than they do your murderers and your drug addicts and your
and he is young.
He's other types. Young. And they'll look at that. They'll probably look at his race and his background, and they'll add all of that out as this poor kid has already suffered the consequences.
Oh my God!
Yes, Yes, and I think he's going to end up. I'm going with 15 years.
15? Okay, I'm going with roughly 20. So maybe it's 21, 22, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 19. I don't know. I'm going to go with only because I knew a guy that really only had a $57 million Ponzi scheme, but it was pitched as like $100 million Ponzi scheme because he had people that were supposed to get back money, but really it was 57 million he had taken in. Mm-hmm. And he got 19 and a half years and he pled guilty. So he got 19 and a half years and he was in his 60s. And I've seen tons of these guys and he went to trial. You went to trial.
That's not a good idea.
What do you think? And they got him on this, and then he took the stand himself, and they're like, "Oh, you said this is what happened. Well, we have this email. Oh, well, we have this text message. We have this one."
I did not have an opportunity to read about what he said on the stand, how he rationalized. Because when you take the stand, that's what you're doing.
Yeah,
you're rationalizing your behavior.
Well, the other thing he did was he tried to say, I forget the name. I should look it up. This is the second time I've referenced it. It's a professional where you rely on a professional reliance, I think, where he said he was trying to say, I relied on my lawyers. And of course, they've got all these emails that show the lawyers it's really bullshit. Like, that's not what their lawyers said. You didn't take your, that's not really what happened. He's like, well, my lawyer said this. And I thought, okay, well, no. So anyway, okay. So let's say you're saying 15, I'm saying 20. We'll see what happens.
So the podcast is FBI Retired Case File Review. And I am very proud that this last week I posted my 300th episode and my guest was the current FBI director, Christopher Wray.
Okay.
So that's big time. So I want to make sure if anybody's interested in what the FBI is all about, I have somebody at the very top who can speak with authority about what's going on with the FBI today. So that's episode 300. I also have crime novels that are based on actual true crime or inspired by actual true crime, fraud, and corruption cases. And then I have my best-selling book, which is called FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, where I go through 20 cliches about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. And you can check out all of that on my website, jerriwilliams.com.
Hey, I appreciate you guys watching the interview. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button if you aren't already subscribed. Hit the bell so you get notified of videos just like this. Also, all of Jerri's links are going to be in the, well, actually, we're going to put her website link in the description. So check that out. Please consider joining my Patreon. Leave me a comment. I respond to a lot of the comments, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. See ya.